Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as the veterinary profession at large. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Associate Executive Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at AAVMC. So I'm very excited. This has been a show long time in the works. So today's show is our LGBT Roundtable. We've got 4 participants who I am just delighted to kind of sit down and chat with. And so those individuals are Dr. Nikki Wright, Dr. Dane Whitaker, Dr. Malcolm Cram, and Mr. Mike Diebler, who is a student at UFL. So I am going to let our guests take a moment to introduce themselves, and then we will dive in. So, Nikki, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, hey guys, I'm a 2014 grad from the University of Pennsylvania. I've been in practice in Pennsylvania in the suburbs of Philly at Banfield at the same location now for almost coming up on 3 years. So I do strictly small animal work. Sometimes I get the opportunity to do a day here and there doing like high volume spay neuter at the shelter. I just got legally married to my amazing wife this weekend. We are still having our big wedding that we've been planning in May, but just like given all of the scary things in the climate right now, we just wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to do that. And we have 2 dogs and 1 cat and 1 fish. Is that good?
Great, congratulations. I'm so excited for you. Congrats. So, Dane.
Hey, my name is Dr. Dane Whitaker, and I am a small animal practitioner primarily. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good. Mm-hmm. And I have been in practice in the San Francisco Bay Area for probably about 18 years, and recently, about 2 years ago, went back to school at UC Davis to get a master's in preventive veterinary medicine. So I'm just finishing that degree now and not really exactly sure what I'm going to do when I'm done with it, but hopefully going to move into something that's more related to conservation and marine ecology, thinking about potentially maybe even going on and doing a PhD. But at this point, I'm doing finishing up my master's and doing relief work in the Bay Area, primarily in small animal practice. And I'm also a board member of the AAVMC and have been very active with that group in San Francisco. And yeah, basically, I'm just really happy to be here and be participating in the podcast today.
Great, thank you. Dr. Malcolm Cram.
Well, I'm the old guy on this panel, and with Nikki saying she's been out 3 or 4 years, I remember when she graduated. I graduated in 1974, and we never would have had this type of podcast or discussion at that point in time. So I'm thrilled to be here. My claim to fame is that I've been on the podium with Lisa several times to discuss diversity and inclusion, which is really the highlight of my life. And in my spare time, I'm now semi-retired. I'm doing integrative medicine. Similar to Dane, I went back to school after a 20-year period of working for Pfizer Animal Health and learned acupuncture. And so now I'm in a specialty hospital in Delaware doing primarily acupuncture, and also I do some companion animal medicine at a separate hospital, but that's much more Western medicine. I've been fortunate enough to be what they call an AAVMA fellow. So I worked in the House of Representatives for the Ag Committee for a year, and then for AAVMA. And way back when, in the 70s and 80s, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, I owned a practice on the Upper East Side of Manhattan for 20 years.
Oh, a lot. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. It's always been a pleasure to work with you and share space and time with you as well, Malcolm. So Michael Diebler, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Mike. I am a fourth year at the University of Florida, so 6 more months, and I'm looking for a job if anybody's hiring. I am currently the secretary for Broad Spectrum Veterinary Student Association. We are the national student association for LGBT students. And I'm married to my lovely wife for 3 years now, and we have 3 dogs and a cat.
Wonderful. Congrats and welcome. Yes, if anybody's hiring, hit us up. Let us know. Michael's looking for a job. So why don't we dive in? This is supposed to be a roundtable, so certainly I've got a lot of questions for you, and certainly we've had some questions that were sent in to facilitate this conversation, but I don't want it to just be me asking you questions. Certainly I would love to hear you really talk amongst yourselves about your experiences. So with that, one of the first questions that I have, and I will pitch this to our senior veterinarian on the panel. What was it like when you were in vet school, Malcolm?
I don't think I can remember back that far. No, it was a very male environment, contrary or in contrast to today, where the majority of veterinary students in the colleges are women. Women were denigrated, and I was at Cornell, and ours was one of the largest classes with women. We had 60 students and we had 8 women. And I hate to tell you what they went through. You would never have mentioned anything about being gay or lesbian at that time. You could lose your position at the university. And unfortunately, I've known of a couple of people who actually did, not at Cornell, but at some of the other institutions who shall remain unnamed. So it was a really tough time. I came in being a city boy from New York City, and believe it or not, that was something to be picked on. And on top of it, I was Jewish, and there weren't very many Jews, and so we felt like, in some cases, second-class citizens. In other cases, there were faculty and other students who were very open to us and very willing to listen. And at that point in time, I was extremely closeted. So that's kind of what I remember from my years way back when. And I'm glad to say that, at least from my experience now at Cornell, it has evolved considerably. But I still think it's it's not something that the schools kind of promote. The one thing that I'll just throw out here is I recently had an opportunity to be involved with an LGBT scholarship at a local Philadelphia medical college, and they actually promoted it to their alumni that they were the first medical college to have such a scholarship. Well, Cornell's had a scholarship for LGBT students and/or residents for, I want to say, going on at least 10 years. And while they're happy to tell you if you ask, it's never been promoted. And I believe that they're the only veterinary school that has a specific scholarship for the LGBT community.
Yeah, I guess my experience in vet school was maybe like completely the opposite of Malcolm's, because when I was in vet school, I graduated in 1994, and I was a very out lesbian at the time. And I came out in the age of ACT UP and Queer Nation, which were all very active queer groups that were really, we were about having pride and having each other's backs and really being out there in the world for each other to combat the AIDS epidemic. And it was a very empowering period of time in my life. So to be in that and then be in vet school during it, I kind of felt like, hey, if you've got a problem with me, bring it on. I was ready to take on the world, So it was a very interesting time to be in school and to be very out and to feel like I had this community of support, not necessarily from my fellow vet students, but from my queer community. And in general, I think things went pretty well for me in school. There were, I got some comments from the large animal residents. There's always kind of the large animal group that would say things, and you just sort of knew to expect that. But I felt very supported by my peers and really didn't have a tremendous amount of discrimination. So I felt very fortunate for that. But, I think it was an interesting time to be in school and sort of have this attitude that, I felt kind of like I could take on the world.
It's a big difference. Mike, I'd be interested in kind of hearing a little bit about your current experience. It seems that certainly there's an evolution, and Nikki, feel free to jump in as well.
So, I originally coming into vet school when I had applied, I had a really tough time deciding whether I was going to put that I was transgendered on my application. And I had some feedback, well, you can, but kind of don't make that a big part, of your essay when the essay called for a diversity. So I made the decision to go ahead and put it in there, but I didn't make it a big part of my essay like they said. During my interview, we didn't really talk about it. It's kind of like the elephant in the room. I asked them at the end if they had any LGBT groups on campus, and they kind of said, well, I think there's one, but we're not sure. So I kind of got that feedback. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of not say anything and just keep my profession separate from, being transgendered. And then I guess when the North Carolina HB2 law came out, I had an issue with going to Humane Alliance in North Carolina to do a spay-neuter externship. And so it came up to where I was like, well, what do I do about this? And, how are these laws going to affect me? And so I started getting involved at that point, and the Diversity Matters Symposium happened to be at UF at the time. So I thought, well, this is a better time than any to come out. And it was the best experience I've ever had. The climate at UF is amazing. They're taking a lot of dramatic steps right now to make everything better. And Dr. Lloyd is on top of his game with really trying to work within the college to create better education as far as diversity goes. But on a personal level, all the faculty, administration, everybody has been very supportive of me coming out. So it leaves you one of those, why didn't I do this sooner kind of things. So.
Great. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Nikki, did you want to chime in?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think when I was in vet school, it really wasn't too long ago either. It was 2010 to 2000. I definitely remember at vet schools and thinking to myself, like, I have a lot of family in Florida and Texas, but I was a little bit scared to potentially be moving there as a lesbian and someone who's not very good at being discreet or modest about any part of my identity. So I felt like, I definitely factored that into my search for a veterinary school. And, that was one of the things that actually really drew me to Penn, was that it was urban and that, it had a lot of outlets and support systems in place already for diversity, not necessarily within the vet school so much, but within the broader university. But yeah, I think that during vet school, like watching, you know, gay marriage become protected on a federal level, it just, I mean, I felt like we were on top of the world, and I still feel like we're in a really amazing place. I had a really supportive community at vet school, and I continue to be very fortunate to have a really supportive community at my practice. But I am concerned with the recent climate and after the election for the safety and the lives of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, especially in those states where I was hesitant to, you know, apply as someone who's LGBTQ. So I think that, you know, this definitely has been a little bit of a wake-up call for me, that, you know, we've gotten a little bit complacent, but I want to figure out what's the best way for us to support not only the veterinarians, but the veterinary students in those places where, you know, people are now feeling that they can, you know, act on their hate. So
yeah, these are different times, and the situation, I think, is constantly evolving. So, so in thinking about that, I'd love for the four of you to kind of talk a little bit, you know, amongst yourselves about what is, you know, what role do organizations like the LGVMA and Broad Spectrum have in creating safe spaces for professionals as well as for students? So
I can kind of speak on that as far as what Broad Spectrum is doing. We are working with Marielle has given us a good funding to start creating umbrella chapters throughout the schools, as well as chapters that are clubs that are already established, being able to collect them under our umbrella as Broad Spectrum and adopting our mission and vision statement. And in doing that, we're giving them support at a national level, which I think is super important, especially like Nikki was saying, in some of those more rural areas where they don't feel like they have support. So that's one thing we're doing. We're also looking at, I'll be talking at Iverson Bell on a panel, trying to come up with some ideas. I hesitate to use the term best practices, but we're coming up with some ways for the veterinary colleges to implement strategies to really help their students, especially LGBT students.
Yeah, I think there, coming from San Francisco, there's always been a lot of a lot of discussion among a lot of the practitioners there who are LGBTQ that maybe the LGBMA isn't relevant anymore. I mean, why do we need to, you know, everybody just accepts us anyway? But that's the luxury of living in a bubble. And I think especially now, since the climate is going to change dramatically, and that, you know, not everybody lives in that bubble. And I think it's going to be extremely important for organizations like the LGBMA to really be visible and really have strategies in place to provide support to people who do live outside the bubble, and people who will not only just be, you know, afraid to come out, but afraid for their lives potentially. And I think that it's going to be really, really important to really come together and recognize that we are very, very relevant, and now more so than ever, and to really put out there that, you know, we have resources, you're not alone, and really be a resource, not just in word, but in deed as well.
Absolutely. We need the LGVMA because for the simple fact of during the HB2 situation, I didn't know who to reach out to. I was not out at my school. And I reached out to the AVMA, and they said, well, contact North Carolina AVMA. I did that, and I was told that it was a civil issue and that they had no bearing or couldn't do anything for me, which I felt very confused about, because it was more than just a civil issue. For me, it was a educational and professional issue. At that point, I said, well, who is my advocate? And I was able to get in contact with the AAVMA. And from then on, I was highly supported. I knew where to go. I knew where to get information at that point. And I had people who were advocating for me. So it's extremely important that we have AAVMA.
Yeah, I feel like, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember the days when the LGVMA was AgVets, which was a very secretive organization. And in fact, one of the originators actually put an advertisement in the JAVMA Journal saying that if you were going to the AVMA meeting and you happened to be, and I don't remember the specific language, but basically gay or lesbian, that we were going to, a group of people were going to try to get together on the down low. And that's when all this started. And I think that LGVMA has brought all of this to the forefront. And while I'm still disappointed in AVMA's response to the LGBT community in general, it has gotten much better than where it was. But really, one of the LGVMA's best friends has been the JAVMA Journal, because way back, it was JAVMA that put articles about the LGBT community, about HIV, in front of veterinarians and got them started at least discussing this. And I think today, it's my opinion that some of the schools are doing a really good job, similar to what Nikki has said about Penn, and I think Cornell and Tufts and UC Davis are very well aware of this in Florida. But some of the southern schools, I still think, are very rigid. And if you were to come out as part of the LGBTQ community, you're going to be hassled in one way, shape, or another. It may be on the quiet side, or it may be much more vociferous, so to speak. And I don't know how the faculty will deal with that. I know that because I've been involved with Cornell so much, I know that there was an issue several years ago, and the dean basically told a tenured member of the faculty that if attitudes weren't changed, that person was potentially going to lose tenure. So I think that type of feedback, and especially when it gets out publicly, is something that makes us as part of the LGBT community feel a little more comfortable and a little safer. But I wouldn't say that it is something that you walk into a practice and you say, I'm here, I'm queer, and now I'm ready to work. You need to, at least in my opinion, you need to kind of get a feel for what's going on in that practice and whether or not you're really going to be welcome.
Great. So that brings me to a question. We have a number of questions that were submitted early, and a couple of these might really be questions that Nikki and Michael might probably be best positioned to answer. So the first question is, what advice would you give to students entering clinics about how staff, faculty, and clients will accept or perceive them if they present themselves as LGBT? So,
well, so I have an interesting perspective on that. I present pretty much as a white, heterosexual, cisgendered male to clients and to faculty who didn't know that I was out. But now that faculty knows, it's much easier. However, I've not had any negative experiences. I've had interesting experiences from a gender variant standpoint. I've had interactions where the there'll be all women on my rotation and then just me. And there's a male client who tends to treat women a little bit in a sexist manner or a little bit flirtatious. I'll put that nicely. And so instead of them educating the client on how to behave, they will send the male student into that room with that client. And I don't feel like that's appropriate. So, you know, being able to educate my clinicians and make administration aware of those things that are happening, and being able to, when a client is misbehaving, being able to, you know, say, sir, you know, your behavior is not appropriate. So I've had a couple instances with that. But as far as faculty and administration on clinics, I've been out, and my advice was just be out. You know, you'll find out who accepts you, and those that don't, more than likely you'll have administration that will have your back on that. So I say be out and don't worry about it. Be comfortable, be yourself, and you'll find the support. There's plenty of people out there that are going to support you.
So, Nikki, one of the other questions that we had was, did you or do you include your LGBT related activities, volunteerism, leadership positions, all of those kinds of things? I guess for any of you, do you include those on your resumes and CVs? And is that the way that you potentially out yourself? What are your thoughts on that for folks that may be entering the job market soon, or even kind of looking for their next political rotations?
I think I kind of took what Michael was saying. Like, I feel like if I'm going to be a part of a team or dedicating, you know, a large amount of time to spend with a group of people, I don't want to have to hide any part of myself. And so even though I do realize that, you know, it may not always work in my favor, my hope is that someone would just see that as like, oh, leadership experience, not like, oh, gay leadership experience, you know, like, and maybe if they did see it as that, that it would be a good thing, but who knows? It's important to, you know, however you feel comfortable, of course, because not everyone is as obnoxiously extroverted as I am. But I think however you feel comfortable being yourself and expressing that, you know, this is a part of who I am, and just kind of like testing the waters, I think that's important for you to be able to find hopefully a match where you will feel at home and you will feel a part of your team. So I was very, very fortunate in that previous mentor, who was also very active in AAVMC, is one of the reasons that I started even looking into Banfield. And then thankfully, you know, I've just had a really great experience. That was kind of my door into Banfield. So I knew that it was probably going to be kind of safe, you know.
Sure.
But definitely it's always one of those things where I'm comfortable just leaving that type of stuff off, and I just feel like, you know what, I might as well just put it on there, and if it means I don't get an interview, then so be it, you know.
Yeah,
So,
I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Dane.
I was just going to say, I think that actually using that can be a way to kind of weed out places where maybe you don't want to end up, because if you're out on an application and you end up not getting that job because those people aren't comfortable with it, then maybe that's not a place that you would be comfortable working anyway. And I think that it also really depends on where you're applying, right? If you're, you know, decide that you need to move back to Central Oklahoma or something, and you maybe that's not the place to be out if that's where you really need to work. But I think for me, it was interesting because I had the experience of applying to veterinary school essentially twice, right? I applied back in the 90s and or the late 80s, and I didn't say anything about being gay on my application. But then when I applied to go back to Davis recently for the MPVM program, you know, they're asking, you know, one of the things they want you to address is how can what diversity can you bring to the table? What can you add to our program? So I was all over that. Like, yes, I'm trans. This is what I can bring to this program. This is an amazing asset, and I use it as an asset. And I think it can work very well in that respect. So it really just depends on the situation that you're in and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, one of the follow-up questions that we had was how do state protections or frankly lack of those protections really affect your choices in terms of where to live and where to work? And I'm imagining that's a pretty personal kind of decision about whether or not you can tolerate being in certain jurisdictions where you don't have those kinds of protections. But I'd love to hear any advice that anyone has on students who maybe, or even other professionals who are thinking about maybe a big move. You can't avoid everywhere, right?
Well, I'll throw in my 2 cents here, Lisa, and say, we've been talking about universities and we've been talking about practices, but we haven't really addressed the animal health industry. And I think we should be, and the reason is that I think that the industry, the Mariels, the Pfizer now, Zoetises, those have been a lot more LGBT friendly than the routine practice has been. They have harassment bases in place. I remember when I first applied to Pfizer, I was coming from AAVMA that had no harassment in discussions or anything. And I noticed that in my application, when I went for an interview, they said that if your spouse needed a job because you were relocating, which I was moving from DC up to Philadelphia, that they would help. And I went, right up front to the HR person and said, my partner is coming up with me. It says that you'll help, will you? And she looked at me for a minute and she said, absolutely. That's what we say we're going to do, and that's what we believe in. And I often talk to students today or new graduates who are in the LGBT community. And if they're really unhappy in the areas that they're working, I suggest that they do look into industry, because I think the environment there is a lot more comfortable. And even if you're working in a town or a state that may not be as friendly to the LGBT community, you have the protection of the organizations that you work for. So just a thought on that.
Great advice.
While I'm currently job hunting, so I'm looking at any jobs that I look at. I'm looking into those. Especially right now, I'm looking into Banfield, because they do provide, like Nikki said, they do provide protections, LGBT protections. They do have cover transgendered related medical issues in their the health package. So that's something that's very appealing to me. And so I don't look just at area, but I'm also looking at company-wise and what the Mars company right now stands for. And right now, I'm more drawn towards larger companies, because those companies have a stance and have protections versus a standalone small animal hospital somewhere that I have no idea. I'm basically the practice manager, the practice owner. It's a much smaller community.
All right, you're good.
Yeah, sure. So it sounds like some of the recommendations might include looking at companies or even practices or wherever, employers that have clear non-discrimination policies, non-harassment policies, and really do practice what they preach in terms of diversity and inclusion. And so those are certainly things to ask about as you apply and as you interview. We actually did a show on some of these issues earlier this spring that was actually inspired by the passage of HB2 in North Carolina, because we were concerned at AAVMC about the implications for particularly fourth-year students who might be doing rotations in that state. And so I'll be posting a link to that original show that we did, I think probably in March or April of this year. And actually, I just heard that the governor just conceded. Just got a text message from our folks at NC State. So there may end up being some movement on HB2 in the next year. So we'll stay tuned for that. So some of the other questions that we had is what kinds of, what would you like to see in terms of changes in vet school and the global veterinary community in regards to LGBT issues? Kind of a big loaded question. So what are your dreams in the veterinary world?
I have a list.
Great.
Hang on one second. I wrote these down. So some of the things that I'm working with at UF with and with Dr. Lloyd and his staff, I would like admission committees to be trained to talk to applicants about LGBTQ issues and be knowledgeable about what the CVM has to offer in terms of support. If the CVM is asking for a diversity essay as part of the application process, then they should be prepared to discuss those issues. I want to make sure that everyone gets a copy of on-campus non-discrimination policy during their orientation, including information on their diversity clubs such as Voice or Broad Spectrum, or even if they don't have an LGBT club there, give them LGVMA's information. I would like to have diversity training for administrators, faculty, and student leaders. This one is super important to me, to make sure that all externships should be screened for potential LGBTQ issues. Ideally, I would want them to be LGBTQ friendly, at least have a list of the ones that where students can be placed accordingly if they need to. And having the administration and staff support LGBTQ / diversity clubs on campus in all ways possible. So if a club does not exist, encourage the development of one. And right now, Broad Spectrum has that partnership with Marielle to provide financial support if there's any students listening who want to start a club at their school, or if you have an existing club that would like to go under the Broad Spectrum mission and vision statement. Also encourage students to participate in SABMA and SABMA Symposium, their diversity initiatives. Get to know those. What is your student representatives doing with that? And just to let you all know, if any other students are listening, that Broad Spectrum is searching for new board members at SABMA Symposium in March. So if you're interested, contact us on that. Have mental health resources available. Those resources should be able to understand LGBTQ issues. And go all the way through graduation, connect with LGBTQ graduates with LGVMA, and set up LGBTQ friendly mentors. And don't forget about interns and residents as well. They need support. They need any LGBT interns and residents need support, and knowing that their school is supportive of them as well. So that's my list we're working on.
So for anybody who's watching or folks that will be listening to the podcast later. Yes, Nikki? Nikki? So anybody who will be listening to the podcast later, if you missed Mike's list, don't worry, we will transcribe that list and publish it for you because there was some really great information there and recommendations for how to improve life with the colleges. Nikki, we can see you and we can hear you. So I don't know if you can see and hear us, but you're still live with us. Does anybody have anything to add in the great big world, in the workplace world for this list, this magnificent list that Mike has created?
It's difficult to add to a great list like that, but the thing that I would, Nikki, go ahead. You.
Go ahead, Malcolm.
Okay. what I would like to see is that AVMA take a much more active role in first off, understanding the demographics of the LGBT community with respect to veterinary medicine. The last time that they did a survey, and I think they do surveys either every 5 or every 10 years of all of its membership, I had asked their demographer if they had asked about if anybody was LGBT, and they said, no, why would we do that? And so I'm hoping that with the next survey that it will dawn on them that this is an issue for our profession. And guess what? We do have LGBTQ veterinarians throughout the US and the world, and they're part of this organization. So that's clearly an area that I think we need. And, you know, without Lisa, your research, the LGBT community would not have been elevated even to the veterinary school. So kudos to you for doing that.
Minimal credit here, minimal credit here. So let's see, we still have about 15 minutes of this show left. I'd love to know about what kinds of questions you might have for each other about your life experiences, both in veterinary medicine, and what advice would you give to your younger selves? Malcolm, I'm gonna pick on you.
My younger self, is that with or without gray hair?
As someone with a lot of gray herself, like we embrace the gray. We embrace
I think that it's important when you go for a job interview, theoretically your sexuality, your color of your skin should not matter, your religion, etc., etc. However, I think we're all aware that to some people it does. And I think you can learn a lot from just looking at the environment. Somebody said to me once, well, do I just come out and say, hey, I'm gay, do you have a problem with that? And, I don't have a problem with it, but I think that another way of doing it might be a little more subtle. And that is if you're going into a practice just to look around. I go out into one of the practices that I work in, and I am amazed at the number of HRC stickers that are on people's cars. Ken Gorska, who's been a gift to LGVMA, he always says, that gay-friendly practices will have a flag on the front of their practice windows, and you can also take the perspective of a corporate interviewer, and what they do is they go online and they look at your digital footprint, and you can in turn look at, if you're thinking about a practice, look at its digital footprint, see whether or not it did something for National AIDS Day. Perhaps they participated in an LGBTM or in an LGBT associated event in their town, etc. And really get a feel for the environment you're in. I would like to say that I have no problems walking in and saying, hey, I'm gay. But I go back to the days when I could have been kicked out of school for it. And I do feel that for people in my generation, that we still have a certain degree of trepidation. So we move slowly. And I just have to share this story with you, and then I'll shut up. But when I was doing my acupuncture training, the first day we had a little study group, and we went around the table, and I didn't know any of these people. and tried to introduce ourselves. And everybody would say, well, you know, my wife or my husband, and we have 3 kids, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, well, my partner is a physician, and you know, we've been together for X number of years. And there was a very bright veterinary surgeon from the middle of the country who later on walked up to one of my other partners and said, I didn't understand, Malcolm. Does that mean that his partner's an emergency physician, so they divide the practice up so they see human patients on one side and veterinary patients on the other? And this was only 5 years ago. So, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done out there.
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, certainly. Any other words of wisdom? I think that we have lost Nikki to some connection problems. Don't worry, though, we will make sure that we get some commentary from her in the after party, after show. So, Dane?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, you know, if I had to tell my former self advice, I would probably tell myself to be more engaged and more active and more involved, especially now, because I think as the political climate changes, things are going to get harder. And I think that young people really need to be on it and be engaged and to be a real positive force for change. And I think, you know, trying to overcome that complacency is really important. Yeah, I think that if I had to give my future self advice, it would be to be a really out visible mentor, because I think I see this all the time in schools, you know, especially here at Davis, that kids are coming to me and saying, who are my mentors? Who are the queers on the faculty? Who are the people that I can turn to and look to that have gone before and have done it and are role models? And I think a lot of times the older faculty are more reluctant to be out. Either they're maybe afraid to be out for the sake of their jobs or tenure or whatever, or, you know, they just think that it doesn't matter or that it's not important. And I think it's so important for us to really be active, visible mentors for the younger folks in the profession coming forward.
Yeah, mentorship is so important. Certainly we talk about that when we talk about differences around race and gender identity. And we talk about the importance of mirrors, but I think for all areas of difference, it's really important for people to see themselves. It's really kind of like seeing what's possible, right? And seeing what that folks are able to kind of scale these mountains and to be successful and to do things. Certainly there was always someone who did it first, right? And kind of like move the boulders for those folks behind them. But those types of mirrors are really important for people. Mike, did you have anything to add?
Basically, I wanted to piggyback on what Dane said. I went and saw Matthew Shepard's mom speak one time, and I remember her saying, be out all day, every day. And I think the more out you are, the more exposure you're exposing other people who may not have known an LGBT person. And I know that's hard, you know, when there's so many of us out there, but the veterinary community is a small community, and the LGBT community within the veterinary community is even smaller, you know, so I'm not saying that we're obligated to be out, but it helps the profession if you're out and you're there as a student, as a faculty, as a resident, as an intern, as a veterinarian in the profession. Be out, be a mentor. It's absolutely important for us to know that, you know, we're not alone. So.
Great. And actually, Nikki has texted me something to add to that wish list. And so I'm going to read what she's written. For me, I would like to add to the wish list that we as a profession acknowledge how biased the profession is, mostly made up of white, cisgendered, heterosexual, air quotes, women. We need to acknowledge that we have work to do, that we have work to do to make our profession accessible to all different types of people. So that is words from the other side, from the text message from Nikki. I thank you all. Any last parting words there? Anybody got anything burning on their souls to share?
I just want to thank you, Lisa, for really taking the bull by the horns and doing this. And you really have been instrumental in raising this issue and being out there. And I think that, we've talked about, Dane's talked about being activists, and Michael has talked about being activists, and they're actually a lot of our straight colleagues who have been activists for us. And I think that they play a major role in building acceptance. And that I recently read something about the fact that, the best way to get acceptance is to kind of move in and let people see who you are. Over a period of time, they're not going to be fearful of you, and they'll actually defend you. And I've seen it happen over and over again. So those are kind of my last words.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say, it's just important to be involved and be active, and to really know the resources that are out there, because we're all here. We've gone through it and we made it, and we're a testament to people that are coming up who are LGBTQ or other forms of diversity that need to be represented. And, when I was in school, none of these groups even existed. So just to have these resources now is so important. And even if you think that they don't have anything to offer you, just even going to a meeting or checking out a website can just make the world a difference. So my advice to everyone would just get involved.
Great. Well, thank you all, Nikki, Dane, Malcolm, and Mike, for joining us this evening. This has been a really cool discussion. Maybe we can do it again sometime in 2017. So thank you for taking time out of your evening, for you West Coasters, your afternoon, for participating. And thank you for the folks that have watched the live stream version of this podcast. So this is likely to be the last show for 2016, but we've got some wonderful things in the hopper for 2017. We will be doing a schedule of the Learning Disabilities and Neurocognitive Difference podcast in early January. We've got plans to explore diversity and research. We'll be talking to our deans from the UK and Ireland about the impact of Brexit on higher education in Europe, and all kinds of really great things. One thing that I do want to bring to your attention, and that is something that we have up on numerous websites, on Facebook pages, and that is we're interested in doing a show on how to be an ally, and that's how to be an ally for any group. And so we're looking for submissions. So you can write out and type out your submissions and email them to me at diversitymatters@AAVMC, or even better, you can kind of take out your handy dandy little gadgets that we all walk around with, hit that voice recorder, and give us a little bit of a recording on what you think it means to be an ally and how to be a good ally. And again, you can just drop that in an email and send that to me at diversitymatters@aavmc.org. So with that, we will bid you adieu. Thank you again to our guest, and thank you to our student producer, Arturo Munoz-Cid. We are so wonderful to have you in the background, as well as our student producer, William, who's a student at Purdue. So thank you so much for all of your help this year in 2016, and we will see you in January. Thank you.